My name is Dennis Speed, and on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I'd like to welcome you to today's dialogue with Lyndon LaRouche, February 27th, 2016. There have been many important and extraordinary, in one sense, events in the course of the last week, and there are many things that have to be considered here today. I'd like to say that this begins a process here in Manhattan of an upgrading of our organizing and deployment. We'll be doing a conference coming into April, and you're all invited not only to participate in that conference, but to participate in the upgrading process that we're going to begin as of today. I think you'll experience it, so you won't have any question as to what that refers to. So, Lynn, I want to ask you if you have an opening statement, and if so, we'll take that, and if not, we'll go right to questions.
At your command.
I think what we should do is go right to questions and get our people here properly upgraded.
That's too high. Hi, Lynn. Kay from the Bronx.
Good. Yes, I'm well aware of you.
Very good. I'm too close. Okay. I'm having a terrible time. Is that better? I'm having a terrible time wrapping my brain around what's going on in Syria, and I'm here today to have you help me out with it. There appears to be two factions in the government, one for peace and one for war. What draws my attention to that possibility is Kerry's cooperation with Putin and China in creating a working relationship with the US, Putin, and China. I have been prejudiced against Kerry and now see him working for a ceasefire in Syria is very confusing to me. What is Kerry's position with Obama? As Secretary of State, he's expected to represent the president. What is Obama's position with this cooperation of Kerry with Putin? I'm under the impression that the agreement Kerry signed was created by Putin. It's hard for me to not wonder if there isn't threats going to Kerry. Does this weaken Obama to the degree that will give someone or some group the courage to remove him? How do you see the British dealing with this?
Well, that's quite a package of complications. The complications, however, are not in and of themselves a problem. It's only when you try to mix them up. That's when the problem comes up. Because the matter is that there are different parties. There are different factors under consideration. For example, just to give you an example, what has happened recently is that there's a collapse of the transatlantic community. The transatlantic community is in a disaster mode. On the other hand, you have the Russian mode and the Chinese mode and other things that are related to the same, which are on the upscale. So obviously there's not a complementarity of voices, but rather a conflict, a very significant conflict. Do you want to live or die? That's the difference. If you want to follow Obama, if you want to work with the British royal family, then you're doomed. If you want to get a succession for a new world system, and you're able to do it, which you're getting with China, Russia, and India, and so forth, this is a different voice. The one voice, the old voice, is the evil voice. It's the evil of stupidity and corruption. That's the voice of Obama, and the British. On the other hand, what Putin represents and what China represents right now, and now India coming in a very significant way, in a resurrection kind of way. And these things are going to develop. So there is no monotone in this process. The question is the crisis. Are you going to die? Are you going to live? And that's it. The two voices. One voice, are you going to die? Second voice, are you going to live? And when you look at things in that way, as I do, it becomes relatively clear. I don't want to have anything to do with Wall Street. I don't want to have anything to do with that bunch. I don't want to have anything to do with Obama. On the other hand, there's certain people in the world who I say are valuable. We say that the transatlantic community is terrible. It's a sinkhole of all kinds of evil. Where on the other hand, what you get with China, with Putin, and get with China, and get with India, you are now almost on the road toward paradise. And that's the difference.
Thank you very much.
Next question.
Good afternoon, Lynn. Alvin here in New York. Missed you Thursday. I had a bad connection. I think we're a little better today, I hope. I wanted to talk with you about, you've stated, that our mission, our purpose is to engage people, bring people into the process of development into a unified purpose. Of course, that means you're going to end imperialism, a very historic, monumental move, and allow mankind to continue in the path that's being expressed by the nations we talk about all the time. And the U.S. can join that, and a happy future can be realized for mankind well beyond our lifetimes. And that we also state, I love the line that you say, we don't need a great many people, we need a few great people. And I go, yeah, but, like, they're hard to find. And then so I've been thinking about that and the frustrations that seem to come from that. And I go now to a circle that I'm familiar with and see fairly regularly. And where I would often find myself complaining that, well, they just don't get it. I'm talking to them and I'm saying things. And one person in particular who's a black man from North America, Northwest America, and I've known him for some years, and it wasn't until actually just yesterday that he expressed to me that, I always thought he was a jock and had the jock mentality. And he revealed to me, he said, I was an honor student with a scholarship to go into an engineering school. And as I was preparing for that, my family collapsed, father drinking, broken home, and so on. And he says, and it was at that time that I just decided to turn jock. I'm raising this because he had this camouflage about him. There's this disparity in the population where we make assumptions or think that we're looking at something in a person that we really aren't. And so now this was important and very useful, of course, because now I think I know what he wants to hear because I know actually who he is and what he abandoned years ago. But there were indications of this before in the times we, would exchange. So in achieving that mission, I just want to share that type of thing that I think is very common and will allow me now to be more effective in finding that the people can realize they're great within themselves if I let them.
Well, that's not that simple. The question is, are you going to be a contribution in your actions? Is it going to be a contribution to the future of man? Now, how do we locate this thing? The people of the United States are doomed. Right now, as of now, they are doomed. They're doing all the things that are necessary in their behavior to destroy themselves and to destroy the meaning of their lives. What we're seeing now, as you see from the experiences which are clinically shown in this matter, everybody in general, as a category, not as every individual, but as a category, the category of the people of the United States and of also other areas of that area are doomed by what they believe in and what they work for. Now, they deceive themselves on this issue. What you have now, you have in Russia and India, as opposed to transatlantic community. The transatlantic culture is now in a falling mode of self-destruction. On the other hand, Russia, China, India, and certain other countries represent a commitment to an improvement in the condition of man's life. So it's not a question of who you are and how you change your tricks. That's a religious fakery, which is a very popular one, to say, oh, I'm corrected now, I'm corrected now. The question is, what are you creating in terms of the future of mankind? And that's the issue. That you can perfect yourselves or improve yourself in some way, and thus find your solution for all your sufferings and so forth. That doesn't work. The difference is that there is a force which is outside the individual type, and that force is the question of true creativity, mankind's true creativity. And what we're having is now the United States and the British, the transatlantic system, is now satanic. It's in a satanic collapse mode. On the other hand, Russia, India, China, and so forth actually fit in generally into an upturn mode. The United States and all of the transatlantic community is ready to go into a deep and prolonged collapse, something like the collapse of the Roman Empire. Whereas another part of the civilization during the same period was in a rising mode, which is not an improvement mode, it was a directly opposite mode. And if we're going to solve the problems which face the United States and other nations right now, that is the kind of distinction we have to make. Just look at one thing, for example, as a clinical case. We had people who used to be working people. They had certain practical skills, more or less good practical skills. But recently, under Obama's influence, what has happened is the people who used to be the working people, the skilled working people, are now rotting away. They're dying. Their self-inflicted dying process. And the only thing we can do about them is to try to get them out of it. But if you look at the policy of the people of the United States, the so-called this class of persons, they're not going to make it unless some miracle comes in and saves them. They are dying. They're committing suicide, mass suicide on drugs and all kinds of behavior. And a group of people who used to be productive in earlier forms of life are now becoming characteristically degenerate, self-degenerating. So the problem is now then, what do you have to say? Well, what can you do? You want to try to improve people's behavior? That won't work. Because behavior is a superfluous. It's not a perfect thing. But what happens, you find that in practice, what Putin is doing, what China is doing, what India is now doing, and others, is actually the road to success. Whereas the existence of the transatlantic society is already a plunge into destruction, like the fall of the Roman Empire. And these are the considerations which have to be examined.
Thanks, Lynn.
Good afternoon, Mr. LaRouche. I'm Tony from Manhattan.
Good.
Recently retired and enjoying very much singing the bass section of our chorus, Messiah. Reminds me of the time that Paderewski represented Poland at the Versailles Conference and went to pay a visit on the French Prime Minister Clemenceau. And Clemenceau said, "By the way, are you any relation to the pianist?" And Paderewski said, "I am the pianist." And Clemenceau said, "My lord, what a falling off was here from the greatest pianist in the world to merely the head of a nation." Well, the reason I'm rejoicing about the chorus is that the choral counterpoint is a demonstration to me of how democracy works. Every voice is precious, every voice gets to lead, every voice gets to support, and there are obvious social implications for this. And my question to you is that I know that from the beginning you have purposed that the chorus dynamic shall be expanded to a wider social and political sphere. I'm not quite sure about the mechanisms that would accomplish this expansion of energy. Could you say a few words about that?
I think about what she just presented in terms of her presentation of the concluding parts of her report today. Huh? There is something which has a meaning. It's not something which improves from in itself. It's something which improves from outside itself. And it's when people change their outlook on life that they're able to see a future, whereas in other circumstances, people can't understand what life means. And that's the difference. So there has to be an internal creative motive which seizes the soul, so to speak, of the individual. And then the individual will not want to do anything that befouls the goal of the action. In other words, the question is, people will go out and they try to be showmen. They try to be successful by people inspiring people or uplifting them in some way or other. But on the real hand is, what does the individual in the process of directing the course of self-development, what does they do in terms of the future of mankind? That's what's important. And therefore, the people who do good things, you have some people who do good things in part, but don't do very well overall in terms of achievement. And it's the overall improvement which is crucial. Many people have adaptations to these things, but they don't have what we might call qualified, deep commitment to these beliefs.
Thank you.
That's what the difference is.
Thank you. Hi, Lynn. So over the past few days, we've had some very interesting meetings with various institutions involved, government institutions, other institutions, and there is a growing, in my mind, it was very clear that you have several of these institutions are reaching the same conclusions that we have been organizing for. And I'll give one example, is that with one meeting of an Asian country, the diplomat said that, look, my country is very concerned about the growing hostilities in the South China Sea between the United States and China. And he said that in our assessment so far, it is all stage managed. But, he said, but there is a reality we have to consider, that what if there's a miscalculation? What if there's something goes wrong, which very likely often happens in history, and then it can turn thermonuclear. So we are very concerned with it. So, yes, go ahead.
Well, the point is, you now have a commitment, which is a fresh commitment in India, and this program dooms, perhaps, or presumes, a great development of progress in China, in India. But it's more than that. This development of relationship between Russia and China and Putin and so forth, these things are a coherent force which mutually reinforce one another in these societies. So what you have a renaissance, which is in India. India's had a number of renaissances, qualified renaissances in the history. You have China has made a very major steps in development in everything, including in space, including the space department. And you have the same thing in Russia. You have other parts of the community. You have people who are similarly disposed, but they haven't realized what they could achieve by what they intend to accomplish. So those are the kinds of things. Which mankind always depends on what? Mankind depends upon what some people would simply say as a perfect personality. That means that the personality is not working to achieve something in the way of power or the purpose of influence for that kind of purpose, but it means that mankind is trying to create something above what appears to be the limitation of mankind as such. And what we're seeing now is the improvement in China, which we're seeing now in the self-improvement program which has been instituted in India, and so forth. These are things which go into the future. They go into, shall we say, the space program, which is the China space program, the backside of the moon. The backside of the moon is something which mankind and mankind's minds has never touched, but it's about to touch. And therefore, it's this kind of creativity which is about to touch by its characteristics, its disposition, its commitment to realizing these kinds of things. That's what's beautiful.
Yes, thank you. Another question is this conference that we're going to do in April in Manhattan. How should we think about it? How should we go about in organizing for this process leading up to this historic conference?
It's a matter of inspiration. In all these matters, it's inspiration, but it's not idle inspiration. The question is do you see inside yourself and it's around your opportunities, do you see something which is to you immortal? And it's immortal because it's something that even though you're going to eventually die, that what you have achieved by what you have done is something whose impact will not die.
Next question. Oh, okay. Can we have the next person line up behind?
Hello, Lyndon. I've been an avid follower of your work for years, and today I come with a concrete proposal and wanted to share it with you. The United National Anti-War Coalition and a number of other organizations have endorsed a protest in front of the United Nations in New York on Sunday, March 13th. And the focus of the protest is going to be both domestic and foreign policy issues that are so close to the ideas that the LaRouche PAC has been promoting for decades. It's a protest against measures that could bring on World War III. It's a protest against policies of confrontation with China and Russia. It's a protest against bank deregulation and other financial measures that brought on the global financial crisis. And so we're trying to bring together different parts from the left, the right, the entire political spectrum that's opposed to the mainstream, to the Republican and Democrat mainstream that has brought this country to where it is right now, to the crisis point at which it is right now. And so the question is, what do you think about that idea, about the idea of holding that protest?
Okay, let me give you a little anecdote on this thing. I'm acquainted, I never personally spoke to him, but I've been active with him in a part of his career, Putin. Now, Putin is a survivor from a set of families which were largely brutalized by the Nazis when the Nazi fight was going on. And most of these people died. They were murdered just by the process of the conditions. And what happened was then you had Putin who developed himself with a mission orientation. And the mission orientation is centered in his awareness of his immediate family's death, mass death in the household because of the Nazi fight. And he fought that course. He has a dimension, which is what? The dimension is, for him, India is important. China is much more important because of awareness of this thing. The role of China in developing the space program, which was a development within my lifetime period of development. And now we have in this whole area, in the Eurasian area, we have from Russia to across the Atlantic, or across Asia. And we have a development process now, which is a rich development, which is not limited to the experience of the people who are participating in that development, but rather they are dedicated to the future of mankind beyond their own lives and the ability of their own lives. And the consistency is that Putin's life, because here he's one of the survivors of that group in Russia in that period when the Nazis were hitting so hard against around that area, and he came back at that against the forces of evil, not just evil against him, but evil against mankind generally. And therefore, the future of mankind is something which lies in what mankind can make as a creative contribution to the future of mankind. That is to be devoted to the realization of something that mankind will not ever fully achieve in its own life. And the whole purpose of this thing, the whole purpose of mankind, is the ability of mankind to make discoveries which the discoverer will never fully harvest. But only the persons who are of that spirit of behavior will be able to deliver an example of what is necessary for the future of mankind. These are much more subtle things. They're not simple things. The devotion of, you just take this whole thing in Russia just as an example. In this Russian case, the mass murder that occurred in Russia, and it was part of mostly battlefield issues. If you know the history of the warfare in the Second World War in Russia. And you see people gave massively the very existence of their lives and worked and dedicated to the purpose of producing for a next generation who to be able to accomplish the missions which the present generation has failed to accomplish. It's that passion which goes beyond explanations of technicalities and so on. These are the things that I think are the most important things.
Thank you.
Next question. Good afternoon, Lynn. It's Bruce from New Jersey. I want to pick up from your answer to the first question, this question of living or dying. And I was very struck on the question of China with the recent change in policy on births at the same point with this Year of the Monkey, where they're talking about it being a blessing for their people of this new generation to be born, not just during this year, but in the midst of China's policy in conjunction with Russia and others on all areas of development, the space program, looking forward to even going to Mars, working with Russia. And it's extremely important that we get the U.S. placed back into that race again, the race to live, not the race to die. And looking at the space program, people forget that with our shuttle program, we'd kind of reached the apex of understanding and application of chemical processes in being able to lift, heavy lift objects off the Earth. And during the Kennedy administration, they just started with the rover program to basically create the Model T of the fission application into lift programs. And even with that, it had demonstrated a capacity, at least double of what the shuttle program was, even at its very beginnings. And we haven't even yet reached the question of the applications, the full applications of fission, nor are we even discussing what do we do with fusion on the scale that we really need to. So I think it's extremely important, the work that Keisha and others are doing to revive that idea, because of what it accomplished in the same way that China is now doing with their own population here in the U.S. and in conjunction with other nations. So I just wanted your thoughts, especially in light of the fact of this discovery of, or the proof of the hypothesis on gravitational waves.
That's very important. It is the Einstein course program, which has now been refreshed again more recently in past days. This is important, but the question is of a somewhat deeper nature. The question is, what's the purpose of human life, and what defines the success of the purpose of human life? And that is the fact is that the space program, as developed by famous people until Obama shut it down, remember? Obama shut down everything that was good about the United States and everything else by shutting off the space program. Because if you look at that, the space program, as developed by these people from Germany, who are persons I knew, and also the scientists who were led in creating the actual space program. This program is intrinsically something which is created by mankind, but not by the means known to living mankind. And that's the point. The principle of mankind is not how long you live and what you can achieve by living, but the question is what you can create for the future of mankind by developing inside mankind qualities which mankind himself at that time had not discovered. So the idea is of a creative conception of the human species, which is not limited to some particular kind of accomplishment, but is actually the active principle of creating the future, even beyond the time of the life of the people who have created the opportunity but have not lived to harvest it.
Next question. Yeah,
yes, this is a tall one. Good afternoon, Lyndon.
Yes.
I had been with you earlier in the 2000s and had to leave for a while. And I was straightening up my living room, making room for a favorite piece of furniture that my father adored. And of course, living in some place for 40 years, you know about clutter. So I come across the pamphlet of The Children of Satan 3. Well, excuse me, it took me a week to read that thing. And I called up Lynn and I said, what's a synergist? Come to the meeting on the 31st of October. Okay. I have a handout for you. Okay. So here I am back again. Hello. And of course, I got involved with the choir right away. I had been singing for 20 years, all through school. from grammar school. And my life was so positive as a child, growing up in the early 50s, the late 40s and early 50s. There was music in the school. We could sing classical music. We were only 7 or 8 years old. We had art. We had trips to museums. We had all these things. Our minds were being stimulated from the time of great youth through high school, even through college, that man had a better purpose than just living and breathing. That man was creative, yes. That was the essence of man, yes. Up under all these very positive things. And watching where the world has gone since Kennedy was assassinated, to watch progress continuously advance and then suddenly plummet. And we hit a desert of depression, mentally, physically, every way you conceive of it. So when I spoke to Helga, you weren't well on that day, Halloween day,
Yeah.
and I expressed the upsetment of having been born into a war and experienced nothing, what seemed to be nothing but war since then. And now we're talking about annihilation. And she says, well, first I'll say, my friends always refer to me as perversely cheerful. So when she said I was pessimistic, I'm going, what? Me? And yes, indeed, I had become pessimistic over failure of society to do what it was supposed to do. Grow, teach, expand, not contract, not destroy. And yet destruction was, for the last, I'd say, 20, 30 years of my life, was the prevalent issue. Destruction, not growth, not making a world better for the coming generations, but not even considering the coming generations. It was all about rot, no growth.
Yeah.
So Helga says, well, this land bridge, and she holds it up, is the answer to your pessimism. So of course I had to have it right away. And I started reading it, and then a few months later we came out with the American extension of what infrastructure could do for us. And I remember back to President Eisenhower, being an army man, saying there's no way to get there from here. This country doesn't have sufficient infrastructure. And he was on a campaign for that, as I recall. And that kind of died. So here we see, I call my little talk with you today a return to optimism. When I first started reading the EIR alerts, which I signed up for right away, again, daily alerts, it was so pessimistic. I was going, I'm going to cry. I need a tissue. And then I would read something about China is doing this, and Russia is doing that. And they're joining with India, and they're doing these 3 things together. And I'm going, oh, that's wonderful. Now I feel a little better. Well, I have to tell you, this last week has been a blast. Every EIR has been happy. And I am so rejuvenated. I'm so excited. I couldn't even hardly sleep last night. I was up half the night reading Friday's alert, and every single one of them is positive. And I have to say this to the naysayers. Putin extends his hand of cooperation to Obama, and he goes, eh. And Putin says, well, here's the phone line. You know, here you go. You need to talk to me. Just pick up the phone. Give me a ringy-dingy. And it's progressing because of his momentum, not Obama's. So I see a bad little kid in the play yard again, my analogy of children playing in the play yard, and you have a couple of bullies, and they're harassing everybody and pushing everybody around. And all of a sudden, all the other children move to another playground and have a great time, cooperating with one another. So I'm looking at the world as like a big playground. And you can see we can put in isolation Obama and Erdogan and let them fight with one another and be negative and stupid, and let the rest of the world hop on this train that China has initiated through Helga's work with the Silk Road land and work toward things that have to do with growth again, with survival, with not just living and breathing, but growth. There is a tomorrow. We don't have to worry about Armageddon tomorrow. And maybe we might not even have to worry about a financial blowout, because if we start putting people to work, they're making money, they're paying their rent or their mortgage or whatever, they're buying food, they're enjoying their life, they feel that sense of contribution, that positive energy of growth. And yes, there's a future for my children. So I'm elated. I am so excited. I don't know how I'm standing here. I feel like I'm floating.
Okay.
I see mankind does not necessarily have
can
to
you
kill
summarize,
itself.
Sherry? Because
Okay.
right.
No, the point is, the mistake is always to assume that you, in the process of your activities, that you are creating the future. That is not the case as such. For example, let's take the case of 9/11, which is something which is very familiar to most people in Manhattan area. And this, what was the positive in that? There has been no positive in that. None. Nothing. The murder goes on in one case or another case or another. It's been a total defeat. And unless we get rid of Obama, unless we get rid of what the present system is, this nation is doomed. There is no rejoicement. And therefore, we have to pay a price, which is not the price to which we get back, so to speak, but it's the price that you pay for your joy in realizing the beauty which can be contributed to the future. Mankind is entirely dependent upon mankind's notion of a living future. This does not mean a mortal life as such. It means that one generation after another generation, other people after other people, actually make creative accomplishments which the younger generations would never have realized. And therefore, this is where the thing lies. It's the ability to arouse people into a transformation of their own self-appreciation, to find themselves devoted to something in the superior, in the future, which has never been experienced before. That's the secret of the whole thing. That's the motive. Can you make a contribution to people who were unmoved, who become moved, who become devoted to achievement? And when as they come to the approach of their deathbeds, that age group, they are still fighting in order to bring about progress in the condition of mankind for the future. And that's what it has to be. There are no such things as cheap rewards in the history of mankind. What there is the accomplishment of great new innovations which enable man as a species to make leaps, not only leaps on Earth, but leaps into the solar system, into the galactic system, and beyond. And what we're seeing with China now on the new program they've got going for that program is now the one which typifies that program, which was developed in my lifetime. And that program is now going to produce mankind's achievement of conquests of achievement in the future of mankind, from the future of mankind into the future of mankind. The backside of the moon, on this aspect is the typical kind of example which promises the future of the human species.
Okay, next question.
Hi, Lynn. Doug Westmoreland from Upper East Side. And my question is about the Middle East. You know, the United States has made a significant contribution in terms of destroying much of the Middle East. And given that, you know, do you support like a Marshall Plan in order to get that area stabilized? We've got tentative peace treaties going on. Do you think, for example, the Silk Road project might contribute to something like that, putting together a Marshall Plan?
Not really. It can cause a development in that direction by the inspiration that the experienced by people who are creative in their impassions. But the whole process is not how you can perfect what your own opinion is. The important thing is what can you do to change mankind's own conception, what mankind has not discovered yet. And the greatest things that can be done are examples of experimental discovery, which discover absolutely new principles and bring those new principles into work. And what we're doing now, what China is doing, with the backside of the moon right now, is one of the greatest projects that's ever been done. It has never been done before. And it's that thing, China's experience and success in developing the treatment of the backside of the moon, that is going to be the greatest event yet to come in the immediate future now.
Yeah, I understand that China is also creating very large projects with respect to water management.
That was already being done, but that's modest compared to this. The backside of the moon is of the highest order of importance for all mankind.
Well, I was thinking about the United States and the fact that we could use some water management here and maybe start up New Appa, as you had pointed out so many years ago.
Well, we did that, but we didn't complete it. We've had a presidency for most of my life, a presidency which weren't fit to live, and they didn't produce much of any usefulness. So some of our greatest heroes were just squashed or actually killed outright, like the famous heroes, and they were just wiped out. And you're going to have to fight, and you're going to have to fight against popular opinion. You're going to have to fight against greed, a fight against speculation. And you're going to have to go out there and say, we now have discovered the means by which we can change the universe by building something into it for man, by which mankind will make discoveries, which will do these things. And it's that devotion to creative discovery. That's the secret of the whole thing. And we're on the edge of this with the backside of the moon. I don't know particularly how well we're going to do and how fast we're going to be able to do that backside of the moon job. But I do know what the implications of that thing are, and they please me awesomely.
Thank you very much.
Next question.
How are you? My name is Ronald Adams. I was instructed to write this so I can have access to talk to you. A few weeks ago, when I first started attending the Manhattan Project, I asked you about the 64 billion USD dollars plus arms sale the U.S. sold Saudi Arabia. That sale was to instigate the conflict between the Shia and the Sunni Muslim sects. I would like to hear from you how you interpret and your translation of the impact on the Western strategies as it impacts international politics?
I think we want to change everything. The time has come, but we have to change everything. Now, the leading efforts include what Russia does. It's very important because of what Russia's achieved, which is a very important factor. It's been a salvation for the Middle East. What was done by Russia for the Middle East has been a salvation of civilization already. You have also in the self-development of China. Remember, the development of China is very ancient population, had great achievements in earlier times. At the time that Nicholas Cusa after Nicholas Cusa came on, this kind of thing was already going on. So what the achievement is to commit oneself to causing the future to produce the kind of development of mankind, an original kind of development of mankind, which brings mankind into almost to the, shall we call it, the angels. And that's what makes it. And the great achievements, the great discoveries, these things, these are what make mankind good. Because when mankind makes a real good, mankind is so proud of what mankind has accomplished that mankind will say, bless this thing.
So how do we influence a strategy to achieve that?
Well, the way I do it is I kick butts, I storm people, I insult them when they need it, and they do need it abundantly these days, all that kind of thing. But I think a kick in the rear end is often one of the most successful features of inspiration. It may just be a net uplifting of a foot, but it's still an inspiration.
Mr. LaRouche, this is Rick from Bergen County, New Jersey. I was supposed to be on TV last night, Channel 13 and NJTV, but my appearance was preempted due to some other activity, and at least it's been moved until next week sometime. I believe it had something to do with this news announcement that came out last night about Trump scoring big with the Christie endorsement. Really big. It's a really big endorsement. I was pretty angry about that. So I shot off an email to people in LPAC, the usual suspects I usually send emails to, and I just wanted to read it and then ask you a question. Is it a blessing or a curse, these two peas which don't fit into a pod? Will narcissism mathematically cancel out? Who is the bigger narcissist? Are any of these idiots not narcissists? They have to be to tolerate their droning, moronic stupidity, oblivious to how much of a drag they are to the human race. And then I pose the question, what is more painful, listening to these people or having bamboo shoots driven under your fingernails? Okay. I think that was my email. Diane got back to me saying Trump needed a body that was proportional to his giant head. Just hope they don't cause a tsunami by jumping in the ocean. Okay. And after that, okay, I'm pretty angry, irritated.
Yeah, but this guy's nothing but a thief. He's a faker, a thief. He's a degenerate of all kinds of degrees. Huh? And he's not worth anything. He's not worth anything to the people who use him. He's a complete fraud. What happens is everything that goes into him, his so-called receipts or options, this is a degeneration of beyond generations. And now I know his whole history. I'm very familiar with his whole history. He's an animal, not a human being. That is, he has no qualities of behavior. which are those of human being rather than animal. And I think even the animal would be blushing about that.
Shortly after that, I got another email. So I'm in a somewhat of a foul mood, and then I see an email from our congressional person, Scott Garrett, in the 5th District in New Jersey, who Diane is very familiar with. And he objects to the possibility of closing Guantanamo Bay because he says the prisoners would be sent to New Jersey. And then at the end of Scott Garrett's email, he says, and listen to the way this is phrased, should the United States close Guantanamo Bay and send the remaining prisoners to the United States, yes or no? So if you say yes to that, you think they should close it and send the prisoners to the United States. That's kind of like saying, asking the question, how many times a week do you get drunk? 3, 4, 5, more than 5?
Yeah,
my response to that is, yeah, okay, going too long. Okay.
Yeah, right.
So what happened to the Republican Party? I mean, it's just, how did it get to such a sad situation, terrible situation like this?
This is a question of pure degeneration. Now, what's the Republican Party based on? It's based on stealing money by inventing it, by fraud against people. Every time you go out in the streets in Manhattan, what are you seeing out there as these structures keep growing higher and higher and worth less and less? We are destroying what we say we're creating in this way. You could take the degree of destruction, which is done in Manhattan, has been done in Manhattan, and you look at these towers, these high towers, you look at them and you say, what is the usefulness of this to people? Now, if we were to take some of these towers and use them for highly sensitive medical purposes, and the medical purposes for these towers, or potentially for these towers, is very great, because you could have a high degree of concentration of medical care delivered within the Manhattan region or about it. And if you use that for the right purpose, you are going to be able to perform miracles in the very terms of the units that are built up in Manhattan. But what do we do instead? Why do we put these things in for medical purposes? Because the medical purposes of these developments of towers, these are the greatest potential for the use of mankind, the greatest kind of potential. Why don't we do it? Why do we just go out there and do dancing girls in the streets or whatever, things like that? You know, it shames the streets. You know, but this is the point. We are not oriented to the kinds of action, of creative action, of transformation of what the productive powers of labor can be for the purpose of the human being. And that is the great thing. Take these towers, clean these contracts out, get rid of them, bring in a science and related kind of development program in these towers. These were very efficient means. To give an example, in the Manhattan area itself, in order to a healthcare program, which would be an act of true genius. Get rid of the rubbish. Get rid of the all these wealth swells.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
Good afternoon, Mr. LaRouche. We've had the alleged right. Now I'm going to go to the alleged left. This week I happened to, upon an interview with Bernie Sanders, he answered most of the questions in a way that I would approve. He wanted to bring back Glass-Steagall. He wanted to tuition-free college, some of these things. However, when he got to the last question, I found smoking gun. He was asked, "What about Britain?" And
Britain.
what about Britain? That's what he was asked. And he said, "We have had a special relationship with Britain, and we will continue to have a special relationship with Britain." The answer to the British question shows Bernie's true colors, as you have been saying. Would you care to say more?
Yeah, well, it's a phony. The problem is that he has certain languages and brags, shall we say. He brags that he's going to do this. He brags he's going to do that. I mean, if you look at the thing very closely, there's not anything actually produced by his actions. He's a phony. And he uses covers, he uses things like that nature. He's just a nothing. I mean, he has his Vermont characteristics, but I think that was probably, they exported these qualifications to Vermont and told them to stay home. Because it was just, what he's done is not useful at all. And there's a lot of fraud involved. It's play games, pitch games, swindles. He's no use. I wouldn't trust him. We have O'Malley, however, for example, as contrast. O'Malley has credibility, and they show pretty generally of what they are. And he's been actually pushed down because they didn't want him around. But O'Malley would have been a much better choice right now than anything resembling this bunch of clowns that are he's sitting out watching. He's a good guy. He's very effective. He's a man of good morals and creative spirit and devotion to the needs of mankind. And this guy's a phony. That's the problem. Sanders is just a complete phony. He does know some things, but it's all phony.
Okay, great. Next.
Hello, Lynn. This is Howard from New York.
Yeah.
Good to see you. And I did have a little optimistic view that some of these Republican guys finally attacked Trump for Trump University, the School of Real Estate Speculation and other idiocy. But luckily, I also went to a real university yesterday to a meeting that was discussing a historical paper about the development of northern Mexico, about a hydroelectric dam and irrigation and other good projects going back to the period after the Mexican Civil War in the 20s. And it brought to me the idea of that I think you once mentioned of time reversal. And it was really impressive to me how these people, even though they were academic, they took the Silk Road pamphlet and had a reasonable point of view, even though limited by their academic outlook about actually doing anything. But anyway, I was just interested is can we actually organize by going back to history and other things that we know, especially in the United States, sort of a time reversal, that we can go back to an optimistic outlook of constructing things, going back to the moon, building infrastructure, and all these wonderful things that we talk about.
Well, I can tell you that I went into Mexico. I went into the office of the president in Mexico at that time, who was a man who I had a close relationship with since that time. We were at the high point of development of the Mexican economy. And we had other figures came in there, and they destroyed Mexico. And they created a drug-doped community of the most vicious imaginable quality, which destroyed the economy of Mexico, the people. That's the problem. Because I was working personally with this. I was working with the president of Mexico in his behalf. And by the time he got out of his office, he was out of the business. He was thrown out of the organization of his own business, essentially, as a president. He was an apt, able president. He had a series of programs which I worked with him in and out. It was all ready to go, and some of it did go. Helga, my wife, was also in there on this thing in a very significant way. We have other things in South America, other regions in South America and Middle America. There are also territories which are being destroyed. The attack on Argentina is now one of the robbery operations which is in place today. So what we should think is we should think about our nations up there in the Americas in particular. We ought to think about what we can do to get this drug business out of Mexico and get similar kinds of things out of other parts of South America, and realize that we have a responsibility to stimulate the kind of recovery which I was working with or in support of when I was working personally with the president of Mexico, and then the Wall Street crowd and so forth, and even the United Nations threw this president of Mexico out of his power.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, Mr. LaRouche. It's a great honor for me to be here and to have a possibility to make you a question. I come from Europe, so there is a huge issue that interests Europeans, and I would like to ask you an opinion about this. So my question is simple. What do you think about the TTIP agreement that the United States would like to sign with the EU countries? So what do you think about these issues? Which consequence can...
Well, the problem is we've got immediate situations in Europe which are deadly. What has happened is because of one agent of the German financial community actually activated a problem greatly, which resulted in great difficulty for the people in Europe. Most of Europe today, in regular Europe, is really it's in a fatal kind of situation. We have the fugitive people, so-called fugitives. They're dying. They're being driven to death. We find the cities and so forth, and the communities in Europe, the governments, by and large, with some small exceptions here and there, are destroying Europe. The best thing we have for Europe is Russia. The Russian contribution now to peace in the Middle East is one of the greatest promises, the realistic promises, which can be realized. This is what the story is. The problem is, yes, the principle is there, but the governments stink. Most of the governments do stink, one way or worse. They're cowardly, they cheat, all these kinds of things. And you can, to build nation building, you've got to give a certain amount of commitment to perfection of the development process. If you can't bring those kinds of technology into play, you may outdo something and say, I did that, but you'll find out it's not worth much. And what's important for Europe now is to correct these errors. And it can be done. It can be done. But the problem is the British Empire controls it. The problem with Europe is that the British Empire controls the economies of Europe. And they're just thieves, so forth. And that Russia has actually made a contribution in this area because it's not stealing.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. LaRouche. So my questions will be based on reading your book regarding the New Silk Road. So in regards of the Bering Strait project, besides the political sphere, how feasible this project is? We know that there is between Alaska and Siberia 55 miles. And how possible could such a project work out in terms of technology? And my second question is related to the corridor, the development of the corridor in terms of new urbanism. Is it a possible theory when we have today cities that are overpopulated? What are we going to do in this case? Empty New York, empty Chicago, create other cities? And the third question will be regarding these smart new cities. I mean, you referred in the book to Fra Carnevale, which is another era. But how possible to create this new cultural and smart cities? Thanks.
I think what China is doing in terms of feasibility, because if you look at what China has done in its very close relationship to Russia, this is very important connection. But China is the more quantitatively achievement case. India will now be coming up, I think, rather rapidly in the same direction. Maybe won't be as big as what's happened in China, but it will become very significant. It probably will take a generation or two to build up something like what China is doing in India. But that's a good thing if you can do it. And I think it can be done in principle. The same thing is true in general in most of these things. But what we have to look at is we have to look at the fact of, as I've said in earlier remarks here today, you have to look at the prospects of mechanisms of improvement which lead to a real revolution in terms of mankind's role. Mankind has to stop being mankind as such and to become a creative force, as China is now doing that, for example, with the kind of program they're going with, the space program. What they're doing is creating a new kind of reality which mankind had not discovered before. That is not in practice. And we still do not know what the backside of the moon is going to look like when we get our grips on it. So I think what that program, the backside of the moon, is the hardest thing right now for all mankind. Because this project, this dealing with the backside of the moon, and this is one of the greatest problems and also opportunities that mankind has ever faced. And it's just floating around now. It goes with the space program, and it's developments which came between the end of the World War II in Russia, for example, and in China. And this stuff is now real. It's ready to go. And it can go. We are on the verge of the greatest achievement that mankind has ever realized in terms of nearby space.
Okay. And one more thing, you speak a lot about Eurasia. What about the other regions like that could be within the Silk Road, such as Africa, for example?
Yeah, it's all the same thing. If you look very carefully, Russia, what you're getting with the developments in the Middle East places which are breaking free.
Okay.
What India is doing now again with its improvement of its own existence. What's happening with China? What's happening available with other areas in southern waters? It's all over the place. The potential is there. I've been there. I mean, of course, in my younger years, I've been in these projects, And these projects will do the job. It can be done. The problem is that powers that have intervened to try to block certain development programs, like the Great Water System, which is still waiting to be launched. And these projects will do miracles just by the virtue of their building up as becoming something that can be used. This will change everything. You know, mankind has the potential of great discoveries, but we have to just pull people together, or groups of people together, to recognize what these are, to recognize what the facility is to do them, which is real, and is to inspire people to see that they are going to be part of the creation of something which mankind, including themselves, had never seen before.
Thank you.
Next.
Hi, Lynn. This is John from New Jersey. I have a question about the Syria peace offensive underway. What Putin is doing reminds me of an image I think you've used before of like walking a tightrope over a vat of boiling oil. But my question is that to the extent this represents a potential global sea change toward optimism, including emphatically for the United States, to the extent this is happening in the context of a broader process of capturing the U.S. presidency away from Obama, the British, and Wall Street in order to achieve this, to what extent do you think this can contribute towards removing Obama and shaking up the 2016 election process?
Well, I think it is necessary to get rid of Obama. If you don't get rid of Obama soon, you're not going to have a planet. Because the Obama policy, which is a British policy, the British royal family, and the British royal family is rotten, it is rotting, it is doomed. But if the British who are controlling of Obama and controlling all the operations that Obama is running in Asia right now, in the threat of warfare in Asia right now, this is as long as this is allowed to be continued, then you are facing the extinction of the human species. That's the kind of threat you have to deal with. If, on the one hand, we dump Obama and throw him down in the toilet where he belongs and make sure he stays there, and under those conditions, and with some reasonable kinds of development programs inside the United States and inside some of the nations in the Americas, we can actually produce programs of development which may take a little time, but they will give them the kind of direction which is needed for the future of mankind. China is going to be the leading figure in the world as of now and for some time to come. What Putin is doing is extremely important in the same way. It's a different characteristic, the same way. And so therefore, these kinds of things that we want to do or should wish to do, these things are possible. But we have to make some actions to make sure that these programs are actually adopted. Once they're adopted, mankind is going to come on a new floor, new factor.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is our final question for today.
Hi, Lynn, it's Elliot. Speaking of Obama and the security of the planet, Rachel Brinkley of the LaRouche PAC Policy Committee sent a report down to us here, which I wanted to summarize or take a couple of sections because of the nature of the event and the intervention which we did, and then get your comment on this. This is a Harvard forum with Theodore Postel, Ted Postel, who is the well-known nuclear weapons expert at MIT. It's a couple of days ago. And what she writes, what Rachel writes, is that Postal had a lot to say about the danger of human annihilation, including a millisecond by millisecond description of what would happen if a nuclear weapon hit Boston. What specific nuclear targets would be in a city such as Boston or any other city, that the intelligence community and the Pentagon have either incompetently or deliberately avoided the facts around this danger, and that the number one target is Russia. She writes, there were only about 20 people in the audience. The sponsoring group didn't seem to advertise it very well. But he made the point that that attendance showed where our society is today, that no one cares about the threat of annihilation. Rachel and Maria Shannon, who were there, posed two questions. One on the shift around Syria, the potential of the ceasefire, that there's only a solution in economic development, that we must join this opportunity to work with Russia and China for a new paradigm. And then they pointed to Obama as a British agent. Postal said Obama just had bad advisors. On first response, he defended Obama, saying it's just policy. But after further elaboration on the consequences of Russia's actions in Syria and what China is doing economically, Postal agreed that the U.S. policy has been horrible ever since Iraq through Libya and Syria. And then finally, Postal strongly attacked Ash Carter, Defense Secretary, saying they were friends earlier, but that Carter turned and deliberately lied regarding our nuclear safety. Lied about the North Korean satellite launch, that missile could be used for an ICBM. And Postal concluded, he said, to join the intelligence community in the U.S., you have to sign off your mental abilities at the door, and that's why the situation is so dangerous. Now, I find several elements of interest here, but I'd like to see your thoughts in response to this.
Well, if you don't do something about this, about canceling this kind of thinking, you may end up without anybody living. It could be the end of everything. This kind of thing is exactly that. And therefore, people who are condoning this kind of speculation and have means to carry out the speculation, they should be restrained. And if this is a case where absolute insanity is a useful instrument for application in universities. They won't be able to do much harm.
Okay, good.
That's probably the message you should send out, because saying the only thing you can do, you SOB, is become totally brainless and fumbling around there trying to do something with nothing.
Because of constraints of time and otherwise, we're going to now begin to bring us to a conclusion. But on this last point, you will remember very well, Lynn, the 1960s and 1970s, the proliferation of existentialism and the existentialists and all the old crazy people we had in the philosophy departments and the psychology departments and so forth, and all of these fakers who had all these viewpoints and opinions. Earlier this week, in a discussion with your associates, you virtually exploded about the idea of opinion and your deep hatred for the idea of opinion. You said some very interesting things on that occasion, and I think it might be useful that some people hear what you said about it. The other thing you said today that struck me, though, was this idea of changing the self-conception of mankind, which requires science, of course. To make everybody recognize that, no, we don't even know who we are often. And it's discovering who we are by changing our relationship to the universe as a whole. That mission which is completely one that is never taught in any American university and so forth. You were teaching it, and that's how a bunch of us got an idea of what it meant to think. So I just wanted to see if you...
Well, we had, I had a very active relationship back in the 1920s, 1930s rather, and so forth, with one of the greatest living scientists of that time. He was also my collaborator in what we did in terms of the space program at that time. We were the ones who did it. Ronald Reagan was in a situation where he was not ready in terms of his electoral process to take a full responsibility. But what had happened is that in the last quarter of that year, that I was entrusted, together with one other person who was a great scientist. We had a close relationship during this period. And so we were advised by the Reagan administration, which is the organization which had been created for Reagan. And this organization was designed to be organized. I became, together with this other gentleman from California, and I was the one who was responsible for the program which the Reagan administration put through. The program was kicked by the attempted assassination of the vice president. And the vice president broke off, and Reagan was put aside. And that's how I got dumped out of this thing. So at this point, I could say that we had a program in that period, two decades approximately, and we were working together, and we had a solution. We also made the most advanced program of scientific development. That is, the two of us and a few people around us that had ever been done before. And what happened was, I was knocked out eventually. Ronald Reagan was knocked out practically, and so forth. And so forth, this entire approach to technology and to culture was crushed by Bush and Obama, the Bush family and Obama. And it was, of course, the Bush family representative who actually caused the assassination attack on Ronald Reagan. So that's history. And I'm still a living part of history on that thing. You want to find out what I know about it? I'll tell you.
Okay, so we're at the conclusion, Lynn. You have any final thing you want to say to us here in Manhattan as we go off on our merry direction?
Let's strengthen our activity. It's not sufficiently developed. We need more juice in our campaign.
All right, thank you very much.